Hey, welcome to another episode of geekoutdoors.com, and on my continuing series on making the move from Windows 10 to Linux Mint, I want to talk about today about the truth of replacing Windows 10 or whatever operating system that you are on. Okay, now before I get into that, if you have not seen my original video where I talk about installing VirtualBox and then installing Linux Mint in the VirtualBox, be sure to check out that video. It's in the description below, or I'm going to have a link up here somewhere. Okay, so what am I talking about the truth? Well, the truth is it's going to take time to learn a new operating system, and more importantly, it's going to take time for you to determine whether or not this operating system is going to work for you and your needs. Okay, that's why my tutorials, I do it in a virtual machine. That's why I do it in a virtual machine, because I know that as as my own experience, it took me a while to not only learn Linux. Okay, at the time I was using Ubuntu, but also I was in the Windows world. I mean, it took me a long time to learn how these new things work, and also, really, most importantly, be confident that Linux has what I needed and that I can completely stop using the previous operating system. That's why I recommend you do everything in a VirtualBox first, because if you just install Linux on top of your existing operating system, say like Windows, and it just does not work out for you, it's going to be really bad. Okay, and you're probably never going to want to use Linux again. Okay, so that is definitely not the route that I want to go. So that's why I recommend doing it in a VirtualBox first. Okay, now with that being said, in my previous videos, one of the things that I really pointed out was that if you are a specialized user, then Linux Mint was probably not for you. And what did I mean by a specialized user? Well, that's what I'm going to elaborate here on this episode. Okay, so there are pretty much, in my opinion, three main types of people to where they are not probably going to be using Linux Mint as their main operating system. Okay. The first type of user, or it's actually a combination of the two. The first type of user is a graphic artist, okay? And a graphic artist, more than likely, if they do a lot of that, they're going to be using an Adobe product. I mean, that's pretty much the quote-unquote standard when it comes to graphic artists, okay? And then the second type of user, and it's related to this, is people who do video, okay? Who use a lot of video editing tools, and mostly for people who do this professionally, but not even having to be professional. Okay, and so a lot of times people will use an Adobe product, okay, such as Adobe Premiere, or they'll use Final Cut Pro if they're using a Mac. And you could still use Adobe products on Mac, but Final Cut Pro, that's one that people really like. Okay, and so if you're a graphic artist or you do a lot of video, you're going to be in this two ecosystems usually. And then the final type of specialized user that might not use Linux Mint as their main operating system are gamers, because gamers are usually in the Windows ecosystem. Okay, there's like basically that is the platform if you do a lot of gaming, because that's where all the games are being developed. Okay, so with all of that, three main categories: graphic artists, videographers, and gamers. They are probably not going to be the user that is going to be making the move completely to Linux Mint. Okay, so why is that? Why is that something that is important? Well, it's important because you have to kind of know what type of user you are, and then for each one of those three categories, there are alternatives in Linux for that, because I really believe that in Linux, and not just Linux Mint, but just the whole entire Linux ecosystem, there is a Linux version that's right for you. Okay, and so I'm going to be talking about in the future, I'm going to be making tutorials on alternative ways that you could do some of these similar things on Linux. Okay, however, like these tools right here, they're usually not going to have an equivalent quality level in Linux, because these type of software manufacturers, they invest a lot of money into making their software and all the ecosystem that surrounds it. And so it's not as easy as just saying, here, make a Linux version. Okay, so that takes a lot of work, and that requires money and resources. So the alternatives that I'm going to be talking about are alternatives. However, they might not be replacements. Okay, so let's go ahead and start first with the graphic art portion of this. Okay, in Linux Mint, if you're a graphic artist, some alternatives that you can have is first GIMP, which is very, very similar to Photoshop. Okay, and if you do any type of vector graphics, okay, then Inkscape is an alternative. Okay, and then if you do things such as raw images, if you're a photographer, then Krita is an option. Or actually, that's actually for digital painting. I'm sorry, it would be UF Raw. Okay, that is for raw files. Okay, and then if you do 3D modeling and so forth, you could also use Blender as well. Okay, so that is primarily for graphic artists, and I would say Blender. It could be used for primarily video, but also graphic artists as well. Okay, which leads me to videographers. If you are doing a lot of video, then in Linux, you're probably going to either use OpenShot or Kdenlive. And there's other options out there like Cinderella. And if you want something that's more professional, then there's Lightworks as well. And if you're using Adobe Premiere, then Lightworks is probably going to be the one that you look at if you are actually doing any type of video editing. Okay, so those are some options for graphic artists and then for videographers. And then the final option for gamers, I myself, I do a lot of retro gaming, and so for me it's pretty simple. I will use MAME, and then I'll use GNOME Video Arcade as my front end. And there's also things such as Play on Linux, and also there's Wine, which basically allows you to run some Windows programs within Linux. Okay, so those are some of the options for gaming, and probably the most important option for gaming is Steam itself, because if you know, Steam does provide some games on Linux, and their Steam OS is Linux based, so that is growing. Okay, which is good. Okay, so those are some options there. Okay, so that is the whole truth of actually replacing Windows 10 or making the move. If you are a very specialized user, as I mentioned, in those three categories that I mentioned, then like I said, Linux Mint might not be for you. But I just wanted people to know that whenever you are making the move or considering that, it will take time. And it will also definitely take time for you to figure out whether these programs, these methods will work for you. Okay, so in future videos, I will be doing more tutorials on those aspects, those three categories, and I will show you alternatives on using, whether or not that'll work for you. That's all up to you. So thanks for watching this particular episode. If you had any comments or ideas, be sure to leave them in the comment section below. And as always, I am on Snapchat at Geek Outdoors. If you found value in these videos, be sure to leave a thumbs up and like. And we will see you on the very next episode. Thanks for checking out this episode. And as always, if you like these videos, be sure to click on the subscribe button. And for full written content, audio content, and additional geek stuff, head over to geekoutdoors.com, and I'll see you outdoors on the very next episode.